writing a review at B2 level and above. Well, before we start, I'd just like to introduce you to an excellent resource from Cambridge English. It is, of course, the B2 First Handbook for Teachers. And in the handbook, you'll find not only a description of the tasks, including the review, but also some sample answers and some useful teaching strategies and tips to help you help your students. Now, not only are there strategies and tips, but there's also an outline of how the writing is assessed. Now, Cambridge English use four criteria: content, communicative achievement, organization, and language. Now, by content, they mean, is the reader fully informed? By communicative achievement, they're asking how the writer holds the reader's attention. Organization speaks for itself. Is the writing coherent, linked well? Does it develop? And of course, language, is the language accurate and is the language appropriate? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a review that I wrote and analyze that in relation to these four criterias. And here perhaps is my first tip. If we want to teach effective writing in the classroom, let's do the writing ourselves. Because by doing it ourselves, we'll see the challenges, the obstacles, but also we'll be able to describe it better to our students and provide very relevant, very practical solutions. Okay, I have to admit I'm a James Bond film fan. I love James Bond films. And here is my review of one of my favorite films, one of the more recent ones, Skyfall, starring Daniel Craig. I'll start reading it with you, and then you can perhaps finish it off silently. So, Skyfall is an exciting James Bond movie with Daniel Craig as the famous spy. The story starts with Bond's mission going wrong, and everyone thinks he's dead. But he comes back when MI6 is attacked and M's past causes trouble. I'll let you just have a minute or two now just to finish off reading the review. Okay, so what I want to do is take this review apart in terms of those four criteria. And the first criteria that we're going to look at is content. Okay, does it perform? Does it complete? Does it fulfill the task? Well, what should a film review do? Well, I guess it should do five things. It should introduce the film, describe any action or scenery or cinematography, talk about any themes which are introduced in the film, of course, bring the characters to life, talk about the characters and the supporting cast, and maybe comment on the soundtrack as well as a recommendation about the overall experience. So, once again, if I go back to my review, you can see that those four or five ingredients are all there. There's an introduction to the film. There's a brief description of the action. There's a reference to themes. One of the characters is brought to life. And then there is a description of the music and a recommendation. So, from the point of view of content, one, two, three, four, five parts. This is the first thing to teach. Okay? That a review needs five separate parts. And I'll just remind you of those: introduction, action, themes, characters, and soundtrack and overall experience. Well, back to my review and back to the next criteria. From content, we go to communicative achievement. And here we ask the question, how does the review hold the reader's attention? Well, when I look at my review, I see that I've used three strategies. Let's just look at them. The story starts with Bond's mission going wrong, and everyone thinks he's dead. But he comes back when MI6 is attacked, and M's past causes trouble. So what I've done there is start the story, but I haven't finished it. And that's my strategy for holding the reader's attention. Start the story, start the plot, but don't finish it. Another part of my review says the film also talks about loyalty, betrayal, and how Bond and M deal with getting older. Well, loyalty, betrayal, getting older, they're familiar, they're relevant themes. So, another strategy for engaging the audience, for keeping the reader's attention, is to talk about familiar or relevant themes. And my final example of communicative achievement here is in my last paragraph. Javier Bardem plays the bad guy, Silver, who wants revenge on M. His character makes the story more interesting. So how do I hold the reader's attention there? What I do is I bring a name, I bring a character to life. So content, we've said, 5 parts. Communicative achievement, how do we do this? Start the story and don't finish it. Talk about familiar or relevant themes, and then bring a character to life. Now, my third criteria, or should I say the third criteria of Cambridge, is organization. And what I'm going to do here is to show you a technique which you can use in your classroom. It's quite simply questions and answers. So what I've done is I've taken each part of my review and changed it into questions. So the first part of my review is Skyfall is an exciting James Bond movie with Daniel Craig as the famous spy. The story starts with Bond's mission going wrong, and everyone thinks he's dead. But he comes back when MI6 is attacked and M's past causes trouble. And I've changed that into 2 questions. What happens to Bond at the beginning of the story? And what happens next? Let's move on. The movie has a lot of action, like a big chase in Istanbul and a final fight in Scotland. My question, what are some of the best scenes in the movie? The film also talks about loyalty, betrayal, and how Bond and M deal with getting older. What themes does the film show? Now, what I've done here is I've taken my model and I've changed it. I've transformed it into a series of questions. And it is these questions that the students can then ask themselves when they write their own review. So, a tip for organization, give them the model and ask the students to transform your model into questions and then answer those questions about another film, book, or play. Well, we've talked about content, we've talked about communicative achievement, and we've talked a little bit about organization. So that brings me really to the last criteria, and that is language. Is the language accurate? Is the language appropriate? Well, you can see that what we've got here is the whole review with lots of color, lots of italics, underlining, and so on there. But what I've tried to do here is identify things which I could usefully teach or usefully revise. So in red, you can see that I've underlined the tenses, and you can see that it would be useful in writing a review to revise the present tenses, in this case, the simple present, but not just. You can see in yellow that there are lots of adjectives: exciting movie, big chase, final fight, famous spy. So 2 tips for your students. Always qualify a noun. What kind of spy? A famous spy. What kind of job? A great job. What kind of song? A fantastic song. So always qualify your noun with an adjective to bring it to life, to add some color. And also perhaps you could usefully review and revise the language of description. Well, of course, yellow isn't the only color that you can see, because you can also see some green there. And what you can see in green are words like movie, story, and film. So you can see synonyms, words that mean the same. So ask the students to think about saying the same thing in different ways. Spy, agent, Daniel Craig, all different ways of saying the same thing. Movie, story, film, all different ways of saying the same thing. So perhaps a useful strategy, a useful tip in the classroom is to get the students to think about the key words and then think about how they can replace them or how they can expand them with 1 or 2 words. You can see that there are some words highlighted in bold. Well, one of the key things about a review is that we talk about people, we talk about places. So the use of names, James Bond, Daniel Craig, MI6, Scotland, very important in a review because it gives it context, it gives it fact, it gives it meat. You'll see that some sections are also underlined, like a big chase in Istanbul, like Ralph Fiennes and Naomi Harris. The language of example. But it's not for example, because for example is far too familiar. It's the familiar language of example, like. And the final group of language is really that language in italics, because what you can see is that every sentence is not just a single sentence, but it's two sentences joined together. The movie has a lot of action, like a big chase in Istanbul and a final fight in Scotland. So another tip to pass to your students, a very simple tip, is to write sentences with two clauses, to join two sentences together, either with like, either with and, either with but. So what have we done? Well, we've looked at a review, and I do apologize for my review of Skyfall, James Bond, but we've looked at a review in a meaningful way, and we've talked about what makes a good review in terms of content, communicative achievement, organization, and of course, language.